Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Take Omnipod Dash out for a spin with a no-commitment free 30-day trial. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by Club 1921, where Diabetes Connections are made.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Laurie Harper was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a toddler back in 1955. Oh, she has stories. We talk about the changes she's seen and why she joined the Joslin Medalists, a program that recognizes and studies people who live with type 1 for at least 50 years.
We have our own private Facebook group and we communicate, and we're like a bunch of kids in our 60s, 70s, 80s. Being competitive, I think we're all looking for that 75, 80-year medals. It's wonderful being exposed to such brilliant people. I'm so fortunate.
Laurie tells us more about that program, about aging with diabetes, and she takes a look back at how different the management was almost 70 years ago. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and I am fascinated by the Joslin Medalists. I have been for a very long time. I remember reading about them just a little while after Benny was diagnosed. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2 back in 2006. And I just thought this medalist program was amazing. If you're not familiar, it began in 1948. At the time, they gave medals to people who'd been living with diabetes for 25 years, which, as you can imagine, was a very long time when insulin, as a treatment for diabetes, had only been discovered in the early 1920s. The Joslin Center is a very well-known and well-respected education and hospital center in the Northeast, named after Elliot Joslin. And the medals were kind of supposed to serve as an incentive, right? Take good care of yourself, and one of your many rewards will be this medal. But then as more and more people began living longer lives, they expanded the program. So in 1970, they began awarding a 50-year bronze medal, and then the first 75-year medal in 96, and the first 80-year Lifetime Achievement Award in May of 2013. They've presented medals internationally. I think it's something like 5,000 50-year medals at this point. In addition to, getting a medal and getting that recognition, it is also a study. And this week's guest will talk about that a little bit more. But these folks who agree to be part of it are doing such an incredible service to diabetes education, to research, and to those of us who are so interested in their stories. And, it really is becoming a bit ordinary, isn't that great to say, to live 50 years or longer with diabetes. As you'll hear Laurie share, that was not expected when she was diagnosed. Laurie Harper was diagnosed in the 1950s when she was just 2 years old. And she's going to talk about how her parents managed with very different tools than we have right now, and how she learned to really live, she says. She traveled, she had fun. She has no regrets, she says. It's a terrific story. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. And you know that I am a big fan of choice when it comes to diabetes technology. I get so excited when there's something new because, if you live with diabetes, whatever type, whatever age, and for however long, you deserve to find the best fit for you. It's just one reason I'm working with Omnipod to help spread the word about their program that makes it so easy to test their system out. It is the Omnipod Dash free trial. If you want to try an insulin pump or see what life without tubes is all about, you can now try Omnipod Dash free for 30 days. The trial comes with no commitment or obligation. Not right for you? No problem. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. Terms and conditions apply. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Laurie, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on and spending some time with me and my listeners. I'm really interested to hear your story. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Stacey. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited to share a lifelong story with you.
Wow. Yeah, we've traded a lot of emails back and forth, so I feel like I know so much about you. You were so generous in sharing information. But your story starts back in the 1950s. I can't imagine you know your diagnosis story since you were diagnosed when you were 2 years old. But can you tell me about it?
Interestingly, I have a letter that my mother wrote when I joined the Joslin Medalist study. So I have more information than I did many years ago. I was 2 years old, and it was Labor Day weekend, 1955. My parents and my older sisters and I were having a picnic in upstate New York at a place called Fish Creek, a beautiful area. And I kept drinking water. My mother said I kept drinking water, and she had to throw away the cloth diaper that I was using because they didn't have disposable, because I kept filling it up. And what was kind of funny, I read this last night. There was a woman that was their landlord at the time who worked for a doctor and said, you need to have her urine test. So then a day later, my father had to be out of town because he traveled. He was a traveling person for his job. And my mother was so nervous, she sent a jar of urine to the doctor's office. The doctor tested it. And what was really, I found kind of ironic, the doctor said, no, she must have used an old canning or fruit jar. There's too much sugar in this. She has to do it again. So they did another one, and my original blood sugar was around 550. And this doctor referred me to the family doctor, Dr. Belair, who was a wonderful doctor. And again, it was a small town, I should say, of about maybe 3,000 people. So we were kind of out in the woods in northern New York. So there wasn't a lot of hospitals and facilities there. So when another day went by and I went to him and he did the test, my blood sugar was up around 800. So he gave me some insulin, and my parents, a couple days later, were able to go to Boston, which was about 300 miles, and that was before highways. And the reason we went to Boston, the two doctors in town said, we don't know how to manage type 1 diabetes. So they went across Vermont, and all I was given was wax beans and some other celery or something, no food at all. But then I had a low blood sugar, which they didn't really expect. So they stopped at a small store and got me some Caro syrup. And Caro syrup is what I took for a very long time. It's not a great way to treat blood sugars, but it worked. And later in life, they used Coke syrup when I worked at a summer camp. So I've found other tablets and things that work well now, and I quite honestly like Sour Patch Kids myself. So
Let me stop you about that, though, because Caro syrup, if you're not familiar, is that just like corn syrup?
Yeah, pretty much. Yep, just a clear, yucky kind of syrup.
Would you drink it? Would you measure it out? How did that work?
I would take about a teaspoon to start. Oh. And if I was still having problems, and again, you have to remember, there was no way to check my blood sugar. So based on the symptoms, I was lightheaded, weak, shaking. I would shake. And later in life, I would pass out and have convulsions. And I have some kind of funny stories. I mean, it's not funny, but...
hey, we find the humor where we can.
I think that's one thing I've learned from this, is look at life and, sometimes it is funny. It's just is what it is.
So I interrupted you. You were on your way to Boston.
Yes. It was then Deaconess Hospital. It was before Joslin, actually, I believe, was established pretty much the year that I was diagnosed. And I do have a picture of me standing outside Deaconess Hospital, holding this little stuffed puppy, this little 2-year-old. And I looked kind of beat up at that point. But it's nice that my parents documented these things. I'm fortunate to have that. But I'll jump ahead to Joslin, which was such an important part of my life. The first thing was they informed my parents what I had, gave them more information about type 1 diabetes, and they told them, again, unfortunately, that I probably wouldn't live much past 30 if I was lucky. I would never have children. So my diagnosis, and again, I didn't hear that at that time, but my father, once they gave the diagnosis, he was a big man, he was 6'1", passed out flat on the floor because of the shock. And they had to revive him. So my poor mother, who was just a little tiny person, was dealing with two of us. So, but from there, I went to Joslin about every 6 months, 3 to 6 months, maybe 3 times a year, about 4 months maybe, for training and education, because I was the only one in our hometown until I was about 13 that had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It was interesting going there. However, I saw the ill effects that diabetes can cause. So I was around people struggling with loss of eyesight, limbs, whatever. But I think I was so lucky that my parents and Dr. Joslin, I worked with him, and Dr. Kroll, told me that I need to manage the disease. It's my disease, not their disease, and I need to be independent if I want to have an independent life. And that was the best advice in the world, which made me grow up quick, but I don't regret it.
Well, let me ask you about that. I mean,
Sure.
You were so young. You were like my son's age. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2. He doesn't really remember anything before diabetes. Do you remember as a younger child, like, were you scared? Did you feel like this is such a responsibility, or was it just your life because you were diagnosed so young?
It was just my life. I never, ever was scared of having the diabetes. Sometimes I think now as I'm aging, I'm probably a little more nervous because of lack of knowledge in the general medical community, and quite honestly. But it never really bothered me ever. I mean, I had 3 children, 3 pregnancies, raised the kids. I've traveled all over the world with friends. I went to Europe when I was 17, which was in 1971, before my birthday. And I had a friend who traveled with me, and
Wow.
she knew enough to give me some candy if I had a low blood sugar. And ironically, she was diagnosed at 25 with late onset type 1.
Oh, wow.
And misdiagnosed as type 2. So that's another whole story. And we're still friends after all these years. But no, it never prevented me. If anything, I think I lived life like I was dying. I hate to sound like that, but I said, hey, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy life. And that's what I've done. And I have no regrets.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around how to ask this because, you did everything you wanted to do. It sounds like your parents and your doctors said, go ahead. But I think it's worth taking a moment to realize you had very different tools than we have now when you were in your teens and your 20s and your 30s. Can you talk a little bit about, memories of traveling without a blood sugar meter, or how you did it and stayed healthy?
I still try to wrap my head. I think there's a lot more to me and people like myself than I think we know. I think there's a lot to do with positive attitude and thinking I got this. I know that sounds kind of odd, but I didn't have a lot of tools. I had structure. My parents wouldn't let me stay at a friend's house overnight until I learned to give my own injections. And that was important. I had close friends, again, that knew that they had to put candy or something, Caro syrup, in my mouth if I had a low blood sugar. One thing that I'll kind of digress and then go forward,
Sure.
but living in a small community, and I took 2 shots a day. It was animal insulin. I'm not sure if it was beef first and then pig. Some people, I don't know, remember, but I took long-acting and short-acting insulin. I only took that twice a day, and I did that until 2000. I was slow to go to the technology, but I had to have snacks on a pretty strict schedule. So my parents had a gram scale. I had to weigh my food and kind of pay attention to things, but she would send snacks to school. And everybody in my elementary class got to enjoy a snack once or twice a day with me. So it kind of helped be popular, not popular, but, oh, good, Laurie's here. We get cookies today, or graham crackers. I will say kind of a funny thing, though, my darn sisters, I was the youngest and probably kind of an annoying child, but they would throw their food that they didn't want on my plate. And I'd be stuck eating all the stuff they didn't want.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
But anyway, when traveling, yeah, I took my injections. I tried to stick to my snacks, and a lot of it was guesswork. I will mention something really strange for me. My A1C has, as far as I've been doing A1Cs, have never been above, I think, 7, 8 at the highest, maybe 7, 8. And I usually am down around 6, 8. I'm usually between 6.8 and 7.5. And as long as I've been doing A1Cs without, and I'm not saying this is true for everybody, but I seem to have something that's kind of a protective factor. And I'm curious about that.
I've heard that from a few other people I've talked to who were
Yeah.
diagnosed as very small children and have lived with diabetes for, 60 or 70 years, that they feel that there's something. I'm excited and interested that, folks like the Joslin Center are, for lack of a better word, are studying you all, because maybe we can figure out what that is, right? And how to replicate it, because everyone seems to say that without really knowing what it is.
That's, I would say, is very true. And there's so much information. For example, I am having, or have had, and I'm hoping to end them soon, injections in my left eye for diabetic retinopathy, which, having had the diabetes so long and getting it kind of diagnosed 40 some odd years in, was kind of discouraging. Yeah. And originally I had laser treatments, but then about 3 years ago, I had to, fortunately they have the injections, and the thought of it was terrible, and I was pretty upset about it. But like anything else I've dealt with, I said, all right, well, let's go do it. And I'm fortunate that I have a husband who drives me and is supportive going through this. But I'm very fortunate that we have this ability, and because of technology and because of research. And before COVID, there is something on the Joslin webpage, and I don't profess to be an expert, but some of the people in this study have this something they call a retinal binding something or other, that where they've not had any retinopathy or problems with their eyes. So that may be something that may help all diabetics. And how exciting is that? It makes me proud to be a guinea pig in this process, I've got to say.
Well, let's talk about it. It's more than an award, right? You get a medal for living with type 1 for 50 years. And then I guess they added a 75-year medal and now an 80-year Lifetime Achievement Award. I mean, it's just amazing to see, but it's also a study. Could you share a little bit about, how do you get into this? Do they find you? Do you reach out to them? Once you hit 50, does I feature like a Hogwarts letter arriving?
That's kind of interesting. The Hogwarts letter would have been fun. I enjoy that show. It's funny. I was one of the first couple hundred to join this study. Oh. And again, it was about 2000, I think it was 2005. I'll have to look at that, but it was pretty early in the study. I think I got some kind of mailing or something from Joslin that they were considering doing this. Dr. King, being the head scientist in that. And it really excited me. And I live about 3 hours from Boston, and my daughter was going to college in Boston at the time. So I thought, wow, what a great opportunity. So I had to get documentation. So that's why I have this letter from my mother. And I had actually a letter from Dr. Joslin when I was 9 years old. I still have that letter that said that he thought the diagnosis that I might live longer than they had originally thought. And that letter was written in about 1962 or something, wow. Which is kind of interesting. So anyway, I had my doctor at the time, who'd been my doctor for many, many years, do some paperwork. I did some blood work to see if I was the C-peptide, and got to join the study. Then I went to Boston and spent the night, and they did blood work. They looked at my eyes. They did a lot of basically looking. We filled a lot of paperwork out, for the scientists. And then we started having, every 2 years, something unusual, we would get together with the scientists and hear what they found. And I was like a kid in a candy store, or maybe not a sugar-free candy store, let's say. Because it can be a lonely disease, because a lot of people confuse us with type 2. But with social media and everything else, we have a lot more connections we didn't have. But that can be bad, too. Too much information from non-medical personnel. But I'll go back to the study. The first meeting I went to, my mother went with me, my daughter, and I made friends that I'm still friends with. And I look forward to people from California, all over the country. And we're still, we have our own private Facebook group, and we communicate, and we're like a bunch of kids in our 60s, 70s, 80s. We have one individual, Richard Vaughn, which has written a book on his experience, and he's 75 plus years in, and a couple other folks. They were doing it even before I did. Being competitive, I think we're all looking for that 75, 80-year medals. it's wonderful being exposed to such brilliant people. I'm so fortunate.
In the time that you've been in the study, and it's been 15 years, it sounds like, have you learned anything else? Did you learn anything about other people's experience that was different from yours? Or do most of you have a similar experience if you were diagnosed, in the 50s or 60s?
That's an interesting question. I try to look at these things. We've all definitely had different experiences. And one thing that comes to mind is some folks have shared where they were ashamed of having the disease. For whatever reason, parents can deal with a child having something such as this in different ways. And that's that's based on background, whatever, different reasons. But I was fortunate that my parents were very open about it and very supportive. And I think most of us, the majority of us, had very supportive parents. And we were taught to manage things pretty much ourselves because it is a lifelong disease. And this is just a weird thing that I noticed the first time we got together. It seemed like everybody had blue on. And you probably know where I'm going because when we tested urine, we had to take Benedict solution, which was a blue liquid, put it in a test tube, put urine in there, and then put it in a pan of water and boil it. And if it came out blue, that meant your blood sugar was in good range. If it came out brown or red, well, no, you had a high blood sugar. You didn't want to see that brown or red. And as a young child, I said to my mother, no, that can't be true. It can't be brown. I'm hungry. Well, yeah, my body was hungry. It was deteriorating. I mean, it was like, yeah, you're hungry. I shouldn't tell you this. I said I sometimes talk when I shouldn't. I one time took the candy that my mother had, chocolate she'd gotten. I bit the bottoms off and put them back in the container.
I'm glad you said that because diabetes is so hard, whatever the age. I don't have any kind of diabetes, so I can't speak to the experience. But I can only imagine being told as a child, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, in a way that's different. Because, we don't let any kid, if kids got to plan their diet with or without diabetes, they'd be having milkshakes for breakfast and donuts for dinner. But it must be so difficult as a child to be told, you must eat at this time. You can't eat at that time. You can only eat this. And every kid I know, whether they were a kid in the 50s or they were a kid right now, at some point does something like that. They bite the bottoms off a chocolate. They hide in the closet and eat something. They sneak food at school. With or without diabetes, I think that's part of being a kid. And folks like you just had it rougher that way. I'm glad you shared that story because sometimes I think many parents worry that their child is the only one doing that.
That's very true. And there certainly is a bigger community out there. And there are the support systems on things like Facebook or whatever. But I go back to, there can also be that competitive thing. And it's not a competitive sport. It's your diabetes. And I think it's important that you manage within your guidelines because I was in a family situation. We, in the country, we were big on vegetables and, my mother grew up on a farm. So I was lucky that I grew up with a pretty healthy diet and I didn't know. So it was good for the whole family, actually. And the environment's different. But I got to say, the technology, what a life changer for me to finally get over I've been doing this for so long, why should I change attitude. When I went to an insulin pump, all of a sudden it's like, wow, I can travel easier and change time zones and manage this disease. And my daughter and I went to Hawaii a year after I got my insulin pump. And that's quite a time change from the East Coast to Hawaii. So it was eye-opening of how I could better manage. And I'll be honest, I don't stick to a strict schedule now. I'm not saying everybody shouldn't. We're all different. I go with the flow and kind of what my mood is.
What made you start an insulin pump and when was that?
It was around 2000. I went on a Medtronic's pump. Now, I must say I was so lucky to have the same doctor for over 40 years. And he had mentioned them to me and then I met with the representative, but he didn't push it on me because he knew I was pretty good about managing things. But once I started hearing about it, I said, oh, well, that kind of makes sense because I still was doing 2 shots a day. I never went to multiple injections. Let me kind of off topic on this, but
sure.
I use the Omnipod now and I've only started using it since August. And one day I was putting the pod on, and it's weird. I have anxiety over needles, which is just crazy. I mean, I've had over 100,000. I think it's a control issue. I want to be the one injecting.
Yep.
So even with these little pods, which don't even hurt, it's like somebody snapped you in the, thigh or stomach or whatever. I realized that was the first time since I was about 59 years, I didn't have to do the injection myself. It was so exciting to me to think I don't have to give any needle to myself. This pod's doing it.
So to be clear, if people are listening and not familiar, you're talking about even with an insulin pump, you have to place the infusion set on the body of a tubed pump. You do it yourself. You insert the needle.
Correct.
Whereas with the Omnipod, you tell the machine and it does it for you, right?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. So it just was kind of like, oh, I like this. Talking about it, though, I love math. I've always liked math. I'm a numbers person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to be. I think it's the diabetes. Having been diagnosed, I've always done well with science and math. I didn't try particularly hard in school or college because, honestly, you're kind of thinking you're not going to make it. You don't really push to excel. And again, I was lazy and having fun. But
well, wait a second. I got to stop you right there. That is an incredible thing to articulate, that your doctor has told you you're probably not going to live. And then you're going through life thinking, all right, well, I'm not going to make it past a certain age. When did that start turning around for you for real? I mean, has it sunk in yet? That's got to be such a mind change for you. Well,
I don't know that. I never accepted that thought process. And I think because of my parents, and I'm a pretty optimistic individual, but I've thought about this in reference to the medalists. And this is something I've become friends with quite a few of the other medalists through meetings and so forth. And it seems a large percentage of us have long-term relationships. And that's an interesting thing because a relationship is negotiating, it's managing, just like managing diabetes. I've been with my husband, we first started going out 50 years ago.
Wow.
And, like anything, it's not, oh, I'm madly in love with you every day of your life. I mean, that's the way it works. But it's working together. And I think having a disease or something like this, you pick your battles and don't stress over the little things. I've never been high maintenance with expectations as far as planning my life out. It's been one day at a time, pretty much.
I'm curious, you mentioned that you think most of the people in the Joslin study are in long-term relationships. Do you notice that even though that's the case, and they must have very supportive spouses, that do you all kind of manage on your own? In other words, I've talked to a lot of older people who don't like the idea of sharing their numbers through the Dexcom or who don't want reminders from their spouse. They're like, just be there when I need you, but I've got this. Is that kind of how you all are, or is it more of a helper relationship with the spouse?
That's interesting. People have shared different stories of how their spouses have helped. And I said before, I like controlling and managing my own things. I do have strong support from my husband, but I recently started talking to him about learning how to use my Omnipod and how to administer insulin or reduce insulin, that type of thing. And my kids are willing to learn. But again, he's getting older as well. So, if I ended up needing more help, he might not be able to do it either, depending on, again, I don't think about it every day, but I do consider it. That being said, he understands definitely when I have a low blood sugar, help me get juice and so forth. And let me say two things. For whatever reason, I've never, ever been hospitalized, knock on wood, for type 1 diabetes. I've been hospitalized for cancer and 3 pregnancies and other things, but I've never been in the hospital for ketoacidosis. And I've had really high blood sugars that I've had to bring down. Either it was a problem with the insertion with the pod or whatever. I've gone up over 1,000. And I kind of wonder about that. Why? Why am I so fortunate and other people can struggle at 300? And the only time as an adult I had to take an ambulance to the hospital was in my first trimester when I was pregnant with my first child, my oldest son. my blood sugar dropped so quickly that I passed out. My husband got the ambulance and they put me on an IV and took me off. And that'll be 43 years in June. So I'm still very aware of my blood sugars or my highs and lows, which is kind of, I think, interesting.
You've already alluded to this as you're getting older, your husband's getting older. We are very well aware, I think, in this community, in a way that the larger medical community is not, of the issues of aging and diabetes. And this is a problem that, frankly, has not had to have been addressed because people with diabetes did not live this long just a few years ago. I mean, in the long march of medical history, just a few years ago. What are some of the issues that you would really like to see addressed? If you could wave a magic wand, what do we have to wake up and take care of for people with diabetes who are over the age of 65?
I'm going to say, let's even take away the people over 65 area for part of it.
Sure.
Any one of us can end up in the hospital. Any one of us can end up in a rehabilitation or nursing home situation. People break legs, they need to go into rehabilitation for physical therapy, that type of thing. That is a very scary place for someone with type 1 diabetes. I've helped more than one person, relatives that have had to go into rehab or nursing home. And in many cases, the diet is so high in carbs. And the main thing is they don't understand the technology and how to use the technology. And we all struggle. I recently had some outpatient surgery, and the anesthesiology group or anything had no idea about the pod or how to use my device. I mean, I cut the insulin back and it was it was fine. I went up, my blood sugar went up somewhat, but the general community needs to have some support systems to help us manage using these devices, because having a lower blood sugar after surgery is so important. I had breast cancer and I had surgery in a very reputable hospital, but my blood sugar I had a lot of morphine from the surgery. My blood sugar went to 450 and I had my pump on, but my daughter fortunately brought my insulin down. But there's even the issue, once I go high, the numbers don't work the same. I don't do 1 to 50 or 1 to 40 units to bring it down.
Right.
I have to keep hitting it to bring, keep taking more, but I can't overdo it because then I could have the low blood sugar.
Before I let you go, I know I'm going to hear from parents of children with type 1, who are either recently diagnosed or they're really just trying to make sure that their kids grow up as healthy as they can, but also independent, as you said, responsible. Any advice for parents?
Give them roots and wings. I actually have a friend whose granddaughter and her daughter is a friend of mine, was diagnosed a couple of years ago, and she's a teenager. And I love how she's working with her daughter. It's hard to not be involved, but she's letting her daughter have roots and wings and learn to manage herself. You're going to make mistakes, but I think knowledge is power and independence is important. You can't nag a kid into doing well, and don't assume they're bad if they have a high blood sugar. I randomly just have a high blood sugar for who knows why. Don't be too judgmental, because it is a disease that there's fluctuations. Anything can make your numbers go crazy. Don't be competitive with the numbers and the A1Cs. Just do the best you can.
I love that. Laurie, you are nearing 70. Hopefully many, many, many more years to be part of the Joslin Medalists study and group. What is your life like these days? What do you like to do? What are the next couple of years looking like for you?
Well, that's an interesting question because I've felt a little locked down with COVID. I'm trying to be careful and responsible, but I am a very lucky lady and have 3 adult children that live close to me, and I have 9 grandchildren. We recently had a new granddaughter born a couple weeks ago. I can say the best way to manage your blood sugar or get it down is have grandkids. Oh my gosh. But that being said, I love to travel. My husband is more of a homebody, so we work well together. I have some friends that I take trips with, and I hope to go to Alaska this summer. I just love exploring. And I do a lot of research. I think I mentioned that to you. I do ancestry research while I'm in the house, and I'm having a lot of fun finding my connections and also interacting with my friends from the medalist group through Facebook. Once in a while, we have a Zoom meeting, and just kind of share notes. It's nice to have somebody in the same boat as you, I suppose. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm very fortunate to have a big supportive family and a lot of fun and kids around me, and that's what makes me happy.
Was there anything that you wanted to mention? I mean, we kind of ran the gamut there, but is there anything that I missed that you wanted to say?
Well, one thing I absolutely loved listening to Joanne Milo's The Savvy Diabetics interview with you the other day. And we've kind of connected, and I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing. I just want to say that I appreciate this interview. I hope it helps some people. And again, I don't have all the answers, but I can say I've been pretty darn lucky. And I'm very pleased to still be here.
Well, I'm thrilled that you agreed to come on. And I think everybody taking part in the Joslin study is just doing us all such a huge favor. I know it's a lot of work. I hope it's fun too. It sounds like there's some fun social stuff in there, but I really appreciate all you're doing, Laurie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stacey.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Laurie and the Medalist Program, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the episode homepage for this one. If you are in the Facebook group, I am also sharing photos that Laurie sent to me from her time as a toddler at diagnosis, some photos from camp. I mean, she was really generous here. And I should actually explain, I don't think we finished the story there in the interview as I was listening back. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2014. And she said it was her experience with, medical professionals and processes over the years that she said, well, all right, what steps have to be taken? We're not going to get alarmed here. She asked a lot of questions. She took it one day at a time, and she is now cancer-free. So I don't think we got to that in the interview, and I wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. It was so good to talk to her. I hope you enjoyed her story, and I love talking to, the Joslin Medalists and anyone who's lived with diabetes for a long time. They have great insight. And I think it really gets to the fundamentals beyond technology to what we all need to think about to live with any type of condition or health challenge. All right, more to come in just a moment, but Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And one of the most common questions I get is about helping children become more independent. Those transitional times really are tricky, elementary to middle to high school. You know what I mean, especially if you're living through it. Using the Dexcom really makes a big difference for us. It's not all about share and follow. I mean, that is very helpful. But when you think about it, how much easier it is for a middle schooler to just look at their Dexcom rather than to do 4 to 5 finger sticks while they're at school, or for a second grader to just show the care team the number before a gym. I mean, at one point, Benny was up to 10 finger sticks a day, and not having to do that makes his management a lot easier for him. It's also a lot easier to spot the trends and use the technology to give your kids more independence. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Wanted to take a brief moment and talk about where I'm going. We've got stuff going on. I am excited to report that I have just finished up, as you're listening, a day with JDRF here in North Carolina. Out in Raleigh, they had a really nice kind of a walk kickoff / meet and greet / hangout. I don't know what they're really calling it here in North Carolina. I'm taping this before I'm going, but I assume it went really well. It was a lot of fun. It was sort of a walk kickoff, all outdoor event. Fingers crossed for the weather. But I've got another one of these coming up in the Greensboro area, the Triad area here in North Carolina. Ironically, they have a third one in the Charlotte area where I live, but I can't go to that. It is going to be my dad's 80th birthday, and we are getting together, extended family in May. I'm so excited about that. Nothing to do with diabetes, knock wood, just going to be a great time. Other things that are going on. This past weekend was also the Friends for Life in Indianapolis. And they will be now planning for their July conference. Of course, they've been planning for it for more than a year, but now the attention turns to that. So I will have a link in the show notes here as well. If you want to look to going to Orlando, my understanding is that they will be back in full force. Last year, they had it in person, but it was a little smaller than usual. And this is a great one. If you've got events going on, please let me know. Of course, Club 1921, we are in beta. We're a little bit under the radar right now because I've taken a lot of the suggestions that many of you made when you first entered the site. Hopefully, even by the time you hear this, I might be ready to kind of bring those out again. But if you have events coming up, definitely let me know and I will show you how to add them to Club 1921. Or if there's something you want me to come and speak at, I would be happy to do so as well. Oh, I'm also taking Benny on some college tours. Yeah, he's a junior in high school, so here we go. And because of that, and because of some Passover travel right around, of course, Passover, Easter weekend, there might be some strangeness in the schedule of shows. I am planning to have these long format interview shows, but it is possible that we won't have the In the News as full In the News. Just last week, I did the In the News show without video. I just had an audio podcast, and that was actually much easier for me to do while I was traveling, so I may do that again. But follow on social media for the full schedule. I will make sure to be clear about what's going on. All right, thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.